Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Ruben speaking to you from south of Jerusalem here in the land of Israel. Today is the third day of the month of Sivan 5783. It is May 23rd, 2023. This coming Shabbat, we are reading parashat Naso, the second parashat, the second Torah reading of the book of Numbers, which begins in the book of Numbers, chapter 4, verse 21, and concludes chapter 7, verse 89. But before we get to that Shabbat reading, this Thursday evening begins the one-day pilgrimage festival of Shavuot, which literally means weeks. And of course, that's referring to the fact that Shavuot follows immediately after the completion of the 7 weeks of the counting of the Omer. And today is 47 days, which are 6 weeks and 5 days of the Omer. So we're getting very close. The excitement is palpable. Anticipation as we draw nearer and nearer to the holiday of Shavuot, which really is a holiday with two different I want to say faces, because that's what we would say in Hebrew, shtei panim, which is a good word for it because it also has two the twin loaf offering. Why do I say two faces? Because in temple times, the emphasis on Shavuot was the first day of the bringing of the bikurim, the first fruits that Israelites would bring to the temple. And of course, we have to remember that ancient Israel was an agricultural society. And this was, this is what people did. It wasn't a high-tech society. It wasn't a startup nation. It wasn't industrial. It was agricultural. And the bringing of the first fruits as gift of thanks to HaShem was super important. And alongside the bikurim, which is the word for first fruits, was the twin loaf offering, which was the only public offering that involved leavened bread. And of course it was made from wheat. And after, as we recall, the day after the first day of Passover, we had the Omer offering, which was an offering of barley, which of course ripens earlier than bread, than wheat, I should say. And but it's considered to be a coarser grain, and at least in ancient times it was used extensively for feed for the livestock. And so one of the themes that we talk about when it comes to the twin loaves that are offered on Shavuot is the fact that wheat is a more refined grain than barley, and it reflects the growth, the spiritual growth and the spiritual maturity of Israel 49 days or 50 days after leaving Egypt. Right? We left Egypt what was the first night of Passover. And so this is 50 days later. This is the third month, and it's the 6th day that Israel received the Torah, which is the other theme of Shavuot. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But Israel was not spiritually ready or mature enough to receive the Torah immediately upon exiting Egypt. They were people who had been enslaved for centuries, and their spiritual muscles, shall we say, had been atrophied to an extent. And Egypt was a land of tremendous impurity, and Israel was steeped in what they refer to as the 49 levels of tum'ah, of impurity, spiritual impurity. And if Israel had stayed any longer in Egypt, they could have become so spiritually tarnished that it would have been impossible to redeem them. So HaShem, seeing that time was of the essence, redeemed Israel, took Israel out of Egypt, even though Israel wasn't yet ready to be a free people. That would take another 50 days, another 49-day crash course of independence, and it really was a crash course. They crashed a few times, as we've learned as we've been reading throughout the book of Exodus and then Leviticus, and now in the book of Numbers. They crashed more than once, but along the way they continued to learn and to grow. And you can't move forward without stumbling. And for every down there is an up. And so now, these 7 weeks later, Israel is ready, and Israel is standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, ready to receive the Torah. Now, this day that I'm recording Temple Talk is the third day of the month of Sivan, the third month of the year, and we read in the book of Exodus in parashat Yitro, very beginning of parashat Yitro, which is chapter 19, verse 1 in the book of Exodus. In the third month from the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, on this day they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim and arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountains. So it was in the first day of the third month that Israel arrived at Mount Sinai and encamped at the foot of the mountain. And of course, what we read, not in that verse, but in a later verse, instead of saying Vayachanu, it says in this verse, Vayachanu bamidbar, Vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar, Vayichan, and they encamped. But Vayichan is the singular form of the verb to encamp. And so we learn from this that Israel encamped united as one, and only as one were they able to receive the Torah, because they were united. A nation that's not united really cannot be open to the revelation at Sinai. But they were united, they encamped as one. And then we read just a few verses later, after HaShem said to Moshe, in verse 10 here, HaShem said to Moshe, go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their clothing. This was the third day. Right? We read just a moment later, on the third day, when it was morning, there was thunder and lightning. Right? This is the third day of Sivan. That was a day that Israel had to purify themselves, sanctify themselves. There could be no contact between men and women, and this began 3 days of preparation, spiritual and physical preparation for receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. So, as I am recording right now, and if you're listening on today, the third day of Sivan, then we are on the anniversary of that day when Israel was instructed to purify themselves, and when the whole performance, shall we call it, of Sinai, with the, as it says right here in verse 16, chapter 19, verse 16, on the third day when it was morning, there was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud in the mountain, and the sound of the shofar was very powerful, and the entire people that was in the camp shuddered. And yes, this is the beginning of the revelation. Hashem's presence is being lowered down to the top of Mount Sinai, where he will from there address the people directly. So we're at that moment. And of course, every year, with every holiday, with every occasion that we're reliving, we're always there again. It's not like Shavuot isn't simply in its aspect as the anniversary of the Mount Sinai revelation. It's not simply, an anniversary, a remembrance. No, we're there again, and we are receiving the Torah again. And so we should be preparing ourselves spiritually and purifying ourselves at this time, just as we were then, all those thousands of years ago, because this is the time of the year this is the season where the heavens will open up, and we can again be receiving the Torah in the fashion that we received it at Mount Sinai, which of course does not disclude the fact that every day we're receiving the Torah anew if we're open to it, because the Torah is always new, and it's always revealing itself in new ways, and the Torah is reflected in every individual soul according to the soul. Meaning, yes, there's one Torah, but there are 600 souls at Mount Sinai, and there are 600,000 souls at Mount Sinai, and there are 600,000 reflections, understandings of the Torah. Each one is parallel to each individual soul, and it's up to us to search out and to find how the Torah speaks to us. Of course, it doesn't mean that we can do our own thing and say, Torah empowered me to do this or to do that. No. We're a people, we're a community, we're a people, we're a nation, and the Torah is written, and those words are eternal, and they're not to be tinkered with. But within those words, within that message, are the messages that speak to us and the messages that appeal to our soul, and we have to open ourselves up and be aware and be present for God's personal address to each and every one of us. So this is what was happening on this day all those thousands of years ago, and of course on Shavuot, which is on the 6th day of the month of Sivan, is the day of the receiving of the Torah. So there is a twin factor again to Shavuot. On the one hand, we are giving. We are bringing gifts of the first fruits to HaShem out of gratitude for having brought us into the land of Israel and providing for us. And of course, what are we bringing to HaShem? That's that which is His. It's all HaShem's. But HaShem is also giving to us. Hashem is giving to us the Torah, and it's the first fruit of our nationhood. It's the first fruit of our eternal relationship with Hashem. So it's a wonderful holiday for exchanging gifts, so to speak. I'd like to say one other thing about Shavuot, which I love to say. You may have heard me say it before, and that is, we read about Shavuot in more detail, actually, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the parashat, the Torah reading called Ki Tavo, when you come into the land. It's the beginning of chapter 26 in Deuteronomy, and it says, it will be when you enter the land that Hashem your God gives to you as an inheritance, and you possess it and dwell in it, that you shall take of the first of every fruit of the ground that you bring in from your land, that Hashem your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place Hashem your God will choose to make His name rest there. Of course, we're talking about Shavuot and bringing the Bikurim, the first fruits. You shall come to whoever will be the Kohen in those days, and you shall say to him, I declare today to Hashem your God that I have come to the land that Hashem swore to our forefathers to give us. The Kohen shall take the basket from your hands and lay it before the altar of Hashem your God. And it goes on to say there's a certain passage that we recite. An Aramean tried to destroy my father. He descended to Egypt and sojourned. There's a whole history of our people that we recite when we bring the first fruits. But I also see it in this way. When man was created, God placed him in the Garden of Eden where God's presence was. What was God's plan? To dwell with man, to be man's partner in the Garden of Eden. Man had all he needed, and man and God could share space and time together. But of course, man, what did he do? He took something that didn't belong to him. He took something from the tree of life. It's not said specifically that he took a fruit, but he ate from the tree of life. I'm sorry, I apologize. He ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what he ate from. And because he took something that HaShem said, that's everything else is for you to take, but not that. He took what did not belong to him. That was man's chet, that was man's sin. And because of that, man initiated a whole process, an inevitable process once he did that, which led to him being banished from the Garden of Eden, banished from the land that God had created for him. But now we're back in the land that God has created and promised to us, to our forefathers, to us. We're back in the land. We're back there. Hashem's here. His temple, his mikdash, is here in the land. And that's where we're going. That's where we're bringing our first fruits. And what are these first fruits? These are the fruits that we took without permission. And now we're returning them, making amends, coming full circle, and speaking to Hashem up close. So that is the beauty of Shavuot, that we're back. We're back where we belong. We're back in the land. We're back near, close to Hashem, and we are exchanging gifts with Hashem, which is what people in love do, exchange gifts. So, once again, Shavuot begins on Thursday evening. It ends Friday evening, which of course means it goes right into Shabbat this year. So it really is a 2-day holiday in a manner of speaking, because it goes right into Shabbat. However, we should also be aware that in temple times, the offerings, first of all, the Shavuot was the first day that we are allowed to bring our first fruit offerings, but we can bring them all through the summer, all the way up to Hanukkah. In fact, there's a cutoff date at Sukkot, but then there's a second cutoff date at Hanukkah, and one of the reasons is that not all our produce is ripe, is ready to be brought to Hashem at this first day of Shavuot. So some things we bring later in the year. But it's the first day where one can bring the first fruits. And in temple times, actually the bringing of the first fruits and the ceremony that take place with the bringing the first fruits could be performed for 7 days, beginning with the 6th day of Sivan, beginning with Shavuot. And that was to enable all the people of Israel to arrive at the temple. And not everybody can necessarily arrive on the first day. And as opposed to Passover, where it's super imperative that you're there on the first day, so that you can bring your Korban Pesach, your Passover offering. It was a little more relaxed during Shavuot, and so people had 7 days to bring their bikurim, their first fruits, and perform the entire ceremony, meaning that later on in the year, if you brought your first fruits, you would not necessarily perform the entire ceremony. And this is also important to know that, and many people are aware that in ancient times there was a bit of a controversy over what day began the counting of the Omer, and it was only after the conclusion of the counting of the Omer was Shavuot celebrated. And so there might have been people who had different ideas of when to begin Shavuot. And not only that, in ancient times, before we had a fixed calendar, sometimes the month of Iyar or Sivan might have an extra day, depending on the sighting of the moon. So 49 days, the day following, the 50th day following the 49 days of the Omer might not always be on the 6th of Sivan. It's very interesting. The other holidays, Pesach, Passover, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they all are given specific dates in the Torah, either on the 15th or the 1st in the case of Rosh Hashanah, or the 10th in the case of Yom Kippur. But concerning Shavuot, it's only the day following the 49 days of the counting of the Omer, which is very interesting. Didn't give it a fixed day. And I think the message there might simply be that every day is a day for receiving the Torah. And there's no fixed day. We always can receive, where HaShem is always bestowing us with Torah, with His love, with His wisdom, with His direction, and we are always have the ability to open ourselves up to it. But even in temple times, even if there were people who had a different count concerning the Omer, different days starting, it would all fall out during the 7-day period. So that was sort of a unifying factor in those days. And to this day, there are certain prayers that we say on weekdays that aren't appropriate to say on holidays or on Shabbat, and we refrain from saying them actually from the beginning of Sivan all through the 12th, some people 13th or even 14th day of Sivan, as a reflection of those 7 days of Sivan, 7 days of Shavuot, as it were. So these ideas, these concepts, these ancient traditions are very, very much alive when you connect yourself to Jewish ritual, Jewish prayer, Jewish practice, Jewish tradition. These things which may seem like ancient history become alive, and they are no longer ancient and they're no longer history. They're happening, and they're opportunities that we can avail ourselves of and latch onto and prepare ourselves for. And so the same anticipation which Israel obviously felt way back when in the book of Exodus on the 3rd day of Sivan, 3 days before receiving the Torah, we can open ourselves up to that as well. We can be there. We can be there. It's happening all the time. One last thing about Shavuot before we go on to parashat Naso. And as I'm saying this, I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say. And what I wanted to say was, yes, of course, one of the traditions that we have on Shavuot is to stay up all night and to learn to study Torah. And synagogues all around Israel, all around the world, have classes and teachings and lessons all throughout the night. The first rays of dawn are around, here in Israel, I think around 4:30 or something. So as early as 4:30, don't quote me on that, but it's around then, we can already begin the morning service, meaning we can have learned all night, have prayed the Shacharit, the morning service, and the Musaf, the additional service, corresponds to the additional Shavuot offering in the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, and be finished early in the morning, at which point we can go crawl into bed and get some shut-eye before lunchtime. But why do we learn all night? Well, because it's a night of Torah. So let's take advantage of it. Also, there is a tradition that Israel slept late, didn't wake up in time. God had to wake them up on the morning of Shavuot, way back when, the Sinai revelation, because Israel overslept, which has some very deep implications. But on the surface, it's also a very fun, amusing thought that on this biggest day, maybe the biggest day in history, Israel overslept. But so we, in order not to oversleep, we stay up all night. Of course, many people don't succeed in staying up all night and end up dozing off from time to time. But as a community, as a congregation, as a people, we're up all night and ready to receive the Torah in the morning. And I'm wishing everybody already a very, very happy holiday of Shavuot. It's one of the simpler holidays today. It's not a whole lot of preparation. Traditionally, people eat dairy. I'm not exactly sure when or how this tradition came into being or why exactly that it's significant on Shavuot. Some say, I think, that, well, Israel hadn't yet learned the laws of kashrut, so we're playing it safe by having dairy. That's a reason. Of course, we also know that the saying, traditional saying from the Talmud is that there's no simcha, there's no joy without wine and meat. So every holiday, most people have at least one meal with meat, and of course we have wine. We make kiddush, we sanctify the day with wine. But that is Shavuot. In the time remaining in our show, let's talk a bit about parashat Naso, which is the second parasha, second Torah reading in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, and of course Bamidbar means wilderness, and we are in the wilderness, and we're going to be in this wilderness for 39 years, which is the time period that the book of Numbers covers. But already we're going to see in this parasha that chronology doesn't always move forward, because if we recall, beginning of the book of Numbers, it said it was the first day of the second month in the second year that the book of Numbers begins, and that would be the first of Iyar, the month which we just completed. The first of Iyar, beginning of the second year, but midway in the book of in the reading of Naso, we are going to be told that we're going to be told that it was the day of the completion of the Tabernacle, which of course was the first day of Nisan. So we're actually going back in time as we read through this parasha. This parasha is all about the Tabernacle. It's all about the Kohanim and the Leviim, the Levites. It begins thusly. I'll read in Hebrew, then in English. Vayedaber HaShem el Moshe lemor naso et rosh bnei Gershon gam him levet avotam lemishpachotam miben 30 shana b'ma'ala ad ben 50 shana tifkodotam kol haba litzvot tzava la'avod avoda bo'el moed. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, take a census of the sons of Gershon as well, according to their father's household, according to their families, from 30 years of age and up until 50 years of age shall you count them, everyone who comes to join the legion to perform work in the tent of meeting. This is the work of the Gershonite families, to work and to carry. They shall carry the curtains of the tabernacle and the tent of meeting, its cover and the tachash cover that is over it from above, and the screen of the entrance of the tent of meeting, its lace hangings of the courtyard, and the screen of the entrance of the gate, the courtyard that were around the tabernacle, and the altar, their ropes, and all the utensils of their service, and everything that is made for them, and they shall serve. According to the word of Aaron and his sons shall be all the works of the sons of the Gershonites, their entire burden and their entire work. You shall appoint their entire burden as their charge. This is the work of the families of the sons of the Gershonites in the tent of meeting, and their charge shall be under the authority of Itamar, the son of Aaron the Kohen. And then we go on to the sons of Merari, and finally to the sons of Kahat. So we're learning of all the responsibilities of the Levites in the wilderness. They had to take care of the tabernacle, its tent, its curtains, its courtyards, the tabernacle itself, and all its vessels, and they had to care for it. They had to guard over it, and they had to dismantle when it was time to move on, and they had to reassemble it when Israel pitched their tents and settle down again. So they had lots of work. Each and every one of them had a responsibility, and as we learned at the end of parashat Bamidbar, their responsibility was great, and they had to do it with the utmost care and respect. Otherwise, it could be fatal. Due to their proximity to the holiness and to HaShem's presence, they had to be very, very, very careful in their work. And after we learn about their responsibilities, we learn about the sota. Sota, of course, is a woman who has been accused of her husband as having been unfaithful, and whether she is or not, he suspects. She apparently was secluded with a man who was not her husband, and while that in itself does not mean that anything inappropriate occurred, it does arouse the suspicion of the husband, or as the Torah itself says, sometimes the husband just has a spirit of jealousy, and he gets this thing in his head and he can't let it go, and the Torah proposes this ceremony at the Tabernacle, later Beit HaMikdash temple, in order to work this problem out. And I'm not going to go into it. It goes into it very much in detail in the Torah, and it's a very unusual procedure, one that certainly I think must seem odd to our modern sensibilities. But I think the point was to help the couple work through, overcome whatever happened or didn't happen in a peaceful way, and to avoid scenarios that could be much less desirable, and hopefully to be able to preserve the integrity of the marriage if it had not been already violated. And of course, if it was violated, then that's a whole other situation. But in this case, the woman has her chance to prove her guiltlessness, her innocence, and must have been a very difficult experience. I have a hard time imagining the whole thing. But right after that, we learn about the Nazirite, the Nazir in Hebrew, a man or a woman who takes an oath of abstention from wine, alcohol, from cutting their hair, from coming in contact with a corpse for a certain period of time, at the end of which they would bring certain offerings, get their hair cut, and go to the mikveh, etc., etc. Again, it goes into great detail in the Torah itself. And there were nazirim. Of course, famous nazir was Shimshon, Samson, who was a certain and unique case, because he was a nazir, a Nazirite from his birth, and that's not really what is being proposed here in Naso. And the most famous female lady nazir was Queen Helena, who was a Second Temple convert to Judaism, and she actually also became a nazir and went through the process and brought offerings at the end. Wow, we've run out of time. Some of my favorite subjects, like the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, which comes up right after that in the parsha, I haven't had a chance to talk about. But here's the music. So I want to wish everybody a very, very, very happy, joy-filled Shavuot. Remember, it's the holiday of giving and receiving, and may we give and receive with love, compassion, and faith. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.